Hi, I'm Sam Candy. Welcome to Sustain Talks. Today, I'm joined by Graeme Heyes. Graeme has a PhD in Sustainable Business Model Design and Innovation and is an Enterprise Fellow working with businesses to support their journey to net zero at the Centre for Enterprise at Manchester Metropolitan University. Hi, Graeme, how are you?
Hi, Sam. Really good. Thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it's good to have you here. I'm excited about it. It's been talking for such a long time.
No.
But it'd be really good if you can share a little bit more about your history and what you do and the work that you do.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the intro. You've sort of nailed it really, but it is a bit of a mouthful. All the sort of long words in there. Basically, I'm an enterprise fellow at Manchester Met. Enterprise fellow is a bit of a unique role because it's not an academic role in the usual sense. I used to be a traditional academic where I do lots of research and publish papers and things like that. This position is about supporting businesses essentially. So I still do bits of research, but really it's all about taking the expertise I've picked up over the last 10, 15 years or so and get to the opportunity to use that with businesses broadly to help them on their sustainability journey.
Yeah, and they need it at the moment, don't they?
Absolutely, yeah. So I project manage and deliver on a couple of programs tied to net zero. The most relevant one is one called Eco-I, so it's an eco-innovation program. And on that program, we basically support businesses who are trying to sort of work out their place in the world. What is climate change? How is it going to impact them? And what they can do about it? Because it's a huge challenge, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, it really is. And I'd like to get into that a little bit deeper. But before we do, it'd be interesting to hear your views, especially with your expertise on what you think about sustainability and what you think of climate change. You know, we're seeing a lot on the news about the floods that we're seeing at the moment. Last year it was the fires. But do you think that we really are in a crisis?
Yeah, I mean, when I started this journey on this career path, I used to talk about climate change as something that was happening in the future, and it was difficult to communicate. I used to say because we need action now for things that are going to happen in the long-term future. But I think it's plainly obvious now that we are living in a climate emergency. We're at the very early stages of it, and I predict it's going to get much worse as emissions continue to not come down at the rate we need to. But I mean, obviously you can't always say that extreme weather events are definitely because of climate change, but we know that they are increasingly more likely because of climate change. And we're seeing it more and more across all parts of the world now. There used to be events that would happen on the other side of the planet. So it was very easy for us in the UK and other parts of the world to turn a blind eye to them. But now we're seeing it in the UK and in Europe on a regular basis. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot more uptick in the agenda recently.
Yeah. And do you like, you know, you mentioned the issue with the growing of emissions. So do you really believe that it is because of human activity that we're seeing this?
Yeah, absolutely. That's not really up for discussion, really. If you look at the climate data, if you look at the fact that it used to be the figure was 97% of climate scientists believe climate change is a human-caused event, and it's recently been updated, I think, to 99.9% now. I'd love to know who the 0.1% are and actually speak to them to see how they've got their perspectives. But yeah, I think it's impossible to not take that position at the moment when you look at the scale of the impacts, the regularity of them, and just the pure climate data, the fact that climate predictions have been proven right consistently over and over and over again. I think it's pretty clear that we're living in scary times, really.
Yeah, I think the thing is there's still so many climate deniers out there, but the facts are there. And you know, we see these changes and it does seem to be getting so much worse, and people are, you know, affected more and more by what's happening, whether it's their homes or their businesses. But the work you're doing is to help businesses to reduce their emissions, get to net zero. Do you think that businesses can make a difference?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it really comes down to business in a lot of ways, that, you know, they're the mediators between the economy and what we do as human beings and people living in society. So, I mean, there's obviously, it's very much shared between us as consumers and users of businesses and of policymakers to determine what businesses can do. But ultimately, it really does come down not completely to businesses, but they certainly have a very important role to play in terms of, you know, what they do, how they make things, what they make, the services that they provide, what business models they use. Businesses have essentially developed in what we call an externalizing economic system, where basically anything that isn't directly tied to what you do as a business, you can just ignore because it's not your responsibility. So that's why things like clean air or a healthy, flourishing society don't have any economic value assigned to them. So there's no real impetus for a business to include things like pollution, for example, air quality, climate change in what they do, because there's no financial incentive to do that. But what we're seeing is like the rules of the game start to change now, because policies are coming into place to try to stop climate impacts from happening. So there are increasingly either economic value assigned to things, or things are being made illegal, essentially. So it's the same story going back to the Industrial Revolution, when we had like children working in factories. All of a sudden, child labour laws come in. We have the Great Smog in London, and then we get the Clean Air Act in the UK, and we're still seeing that roll out across the world. Then we had things like the landfill tax, and then more recently carbon taxes. And I mean, just in the last year, we've had in Greater Manchester, we had the Clean Air Bill for Greater Manchester come in and get put on pause eventually, but I'm sure that'll come back. We've had a ban on red diesel recently, which is meaning that businesses that have been reliant on that for decades now are now all of a sudden thinking, actually, hydrogen is not that much expensive than the other alternatives. So maybe that's something we can look at now. So the whole game that businesses, or the rules of the game that businesses are engaged in, is shifting. And I was thinking about this in preparation for this interview this morning. I went for a little walk, and it occurred to me that whether we have climate impact that devastates the planet, or we manage to stop climate change, the rules of those games are very similar, because either way, if we live on a planet where everything's collapsed, there's not going to be many resources. You're going to have to be efficient. You're going to have to be localized just to survive. And we need to do that to stop climate change from happening. So whether we stop climate change or not, the future for business is operating in a sustainable, efficient, responsible manner.
Yeah. Do you think we can, saying that, do you think that we can stop climate change?
I think it's a huge, huge, huge challenge. I think we absolutely can. We've done it before, you know, like this is not the first time we've encountered something of an unbelievably huge scale that is almost impossible to even conceive of stopping. Like we've done that with the Second World War, for example. And there's some great examples from the Second World War where you look at how entire industries completely reorganized in no time at all, from making pots and pans into making armor for tanks and stuff like that, from lingerie manufacturers making netting for the war effort. We had there was campaigns for shared car sharing. There was like banners saying, if you drive alone, you drive with Hitler. So really powerful messages. And
wow.
Yeah, but they really caused a huge change, and people got into that because they saw the threat of this major thing that was posed to society. And so we've done it before. We can definitely do it again, especially when you see all the new technologies that we have coming available. The fact that there's still a narrative that climate change is very expensive and it'll make things worse. But for me, it's not just about stopping climate change. Sustainability is about trying to create a cleaner, healthier, happier, flourishing society. So I think there's something really positive from it as well as opportunity. So the one thing I always say is there's never been something that's so clearly going to happen, where we know the consequences very clearly, we know what we need to do very clearly, but nearly no business is ready to make those changes. So if you can be one of those businesses that can do that, it's a huge opportunity for growth as well.
Why do you think they're not ready? Do you think it's just a lack of knowledge and understanding, or do you think businesses are scared it's going to cost more money and they're focused on other things? You know, there's cost of living crisis going on right now. What do you think are the key issues to businesses not getting on board?
I think it's all of those. I think it's naive to say that being more responsible or more resilient isn't or doesn't carry costs with it, because we're talking about this, internalizing of things that we externalized before. So you can't just throw things into rivers anymore. You've got to dispose of them responsibly. Well, that's what we're supposed to do. So it is getting more expensive, which is a huge barrier. But you've got to look at that in the context of a full cost benefit analysis and the costs of inaction, which are far more significant. The other thing is, it's really difficult to change, because you need to be aware of what's happening. So you need to be aware of climate change, and there's still not a popular discourse about that, really. You see it more and more in the news and things like that, but there's still a lot of people who have no idea about climate change or believe it or know any of the data behind it. You need the time in your business, managing a business, especially if you're like an SME. It's really difficult to get the time to horizon scan and see how is the world changing and how you can take advantage of that. If you're a big business, you've probably got people working in sustainability or with the time to do that stuff, but you're a big juggernaut of an organization that's very difficult to change. You've got shareholders to respond to. So there's this awareness factor, the time factor, and then you've got to be agile. So you've got to be able to, or willing to take a risk and be bold enough to do something a bit different. And that's ultimately how businesses innovate and grow and become long-lasting, successful businesses. You have to do that in order to keep on surviving. But it takes a lot of courage to do that, and not as many businesses do that, I think, as should do.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about the Eco-I programme and what is involved in that? Because I think that's a really good opportunity for businesses.
Yeah, I mean, we basically respond exactly to that narrative, really. So what I love about the program is we get all sorts of different businesses who come on. We get businesses who have decided that for whatever reason they've become aware of climate change, and this is the thing for them. They want climate change to be their reason for being. And I love working with them because they're really ambitious and we get to do really great things with them. Other businesses come on because, say, for example, red diesel has been banned, so they're looking for ways how they can continue to exist, but through sustainable technologies, and they're really interesting from an innovation perspective. My favorites, though, are people who come on because basically their boss has told them to come on and they don't really know that much about sustainability. And they leave the program generally saying really encouraging things like, I had no idea about this, but I'm going to go home, tell my boss, tell my family, tell my friends, and really try to start my journey on this. So I really like working with those groups the most. What we do on the program is we sit down with businesses to help them understand, first of all, what is climate change? How is the world changing? How is this going to affect the wider society, even whether that's through climate impact or through things like policy or new technologies. We then get them to sort of look at, what does the future world look like? Whether we want to stop climate change or we think climate change is going to happen, what does this future idealistic world that we want to achieve look like? And then we sort of map the business's current business model and what they do at the moment. And we can see that usually what they're doing doesn't match that future world. So we can start to say, if you want to be a thriving enterprise in the future, you need to be thinking about that future world rather than the world of today. So then all of a sudden we have like a core set of values and a vision that we can move towards. So then we do something called, we do backcasting and academic words you don't need to know about. We basically help businesses to sort of prioritize and create pathways of how they can move towards achieving that vision over long periods of time. So they leave with a climate action strategy or an action plan. We always say that businesses should do carbon accounting as a first step, because that's how you can get your baseline. But also, if you're an SME looking to start the journey and you're looking at where are the key things that you can have impact in, we don't think a carbon account is strictly necessary. It's best practice. But if you're a small business looking to do something, you can usually tell what your main emissions are without a great deal of information to support it. So you lose the ability to get your baseline and stuff, but often you can go back and establish that information. But just to develop an initial strategy, you can identify what your core priority areas are and prioritize which ones are the priority areas. And then all of a sudden, you've got an action plan that you can go away and implement in your business.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. And do people have to apply? How many companies are on the programme?
We've had over 100 businesses over the last year or so.
Yeah.
So we run cohorts about once a month typically, where we have between we've had a couple of big cohorts of 40 businesses, but usually it's about closer to 10. So because we like to do it on a very one-to-one level as possible. We have just actually hit our targets for the program. So we are currently now working more with businesses to develop innovations with us, because that's the other thing that we do. We don't just give them that guidance. We then work with them to say, who in our university can we link you with to try to do really interesting things. So we've got like there's a coffee roasting business that's looking at to use pig slurry from a local farm as an anaerobic digester, so they can use that to power the coffee roasting business. We've had a packaging company in the fast fashion sector who 40% of fast fashion products get returned. So they recycle these plastic bags that they get back, but they have paper with the envelope on. So they wash that off and then they're left with loads of paper pulp. So we're working with them to see if we can turn that into energy through anaerobic digestion. And then we think the spent paper from that we can then use in cement as an additive in cement, which will reduce the carbon emissions of cement. So we're trying to do really innovative things with businesses. So that's what we're exploring at the moment, is how can we get as many carbon savings as possible.
That's really great. And I bet I mean, as you say, there's some great things that have come out of that. But interestingly, you talk about innovation, and obviously technology is playing a big part in innovation at the moment. But what do you think that, and I strongly believe that the innovation that is being developed at the moment is things that we don't know about that are going to come out in 5 years' time that could help us with the climate crisis. But are there any things that really stand out to you with your knowledge and expertise, that some innovations that we're going to see more of and see grow in the future?
What's really, really interesting is there's a thing, I don't know if you've heard of this. I think it's called the Gartner hype cycle. I've always just called it the hype cycle. I think it's someone called Gartner who created it. And it's basically a journey and innovation goes on. So if I use self-driving cars as an example, the technology of automated driving comes available. And then there's loads of hype around it of how it's going to change the world. But then the technology gets so advanced, it starts to get used in society. So then with self-driving cars, we have people get run over. I saw yesterday there was a Tesla in America that just stopped on the freeway and caused a pileup, and then it just stopped for no reason. So all of a sudden the hype goes down because people get a bit wary about the technology. But then over time, it becomes part of society and it's just something used on a day-to-day basis. Never before in human history have there been so many innovations and technology on that initial hype part where it's building up that all have the ability to change the world. So there's one of the programs I manage is on 3D printing, and there's already the technology of 4D printing is coming soon, which is basically 3D printed items that can change in their form over time. I don't really know how that works. I need to learn more about that. It sounds very futuristic. There's also something called smart dust, which is basically computer processing at a dust level, so microprocessing, which could have huge impact in things. I think automation is going to completely change the world. For one, I think there's going to be a massive unemployment as jobs are lost to AI and robots. And I don't know how we're going to cope with that as a society, but hopefully there'll be environmental benefits there. I think what's really interesting, I was speaking to an AI expert yesterday, because we're looking into how AI can help decarbonize the energy system. And there's massive opportunities with AI in terms of looking at the energy grid and turning off things when they're not needed and stuff like that. But when you get new technologies, they often get used in ways where they're not necessarily supposed to, and no one's really looking with AI what the negative impacts might be. Just as an example, that's the case with a lot of technology. So I think there's a lot of technologies coming online, but it's just very important that sustainability is embedded right at the core of their design and how they're developed and used, because otherwise they can just get left behind, and then there can be a negative impact from some technologies as well.
Yeah. Have you, I assume you've been looking at ChatGPT?
I haven't heard of that, no.
ChatGPT.
ChatGPT, yes. Yeah, I have. Yeah.
Yeah. And that in itself, I think the developments of that is like a more developed Google. But I think that that also can play a big part in sustainability, and how people can get answers very quickly to the things that they need, and how they can put more education out, and how it can help in universities and with students as well. But you work closely with the students, you work in a university. Are you seeing, like, with students, that they're really showing an interest in sustainability and environment and climate change?
We are. This is probably my most controversial view in the whole sustainability world. There's a narrative that young people are the future, and they're going to change everything and save us all from climate catastrophe, and they are the future. And I've met plenty of students who blow me away and almost make me feel inadequate because they're so advanced and so mature in the way that they work. But equally, I remember, without wanting to sound like an old moaning person, when I was at university, I think I knew one person who had a car. And there's so many students I see driving to work these days. There's so many people on some of the units I've taught about sustainable business. People come on and they're like, I actually didn't know any of this stuff still. I've done lectures about fast fashion and the impact of that. And then when you give them an activity, you'll see students sometimes on fast fashion websites buying things. And it's like, oh. So I think students are more aware. Certainly, when I started this journey, I didn't know anything about climate change. When I was 18, I don't think I'd even probably heard about climate change. And now when I teach students who are motivated on this agenda, I feel a bit like my time's wasted, because they know so much. They know everything that I tell them because they're really switched on and they know about it. And that body is growing. But I guess my point is there's still a lot more to do. There's a lot more students who need to be engaged with, which is what we're trying to do at our university. We're trying to embed sustainability across all of our units, all of our modules, so that every student basically leaves as a carbon literate student who understands the implications of what they go on to do in the future life, what the implications of that are for sustainability.
I think that's great. And actually, when you look at the way that jobs are changing and the skills that are going to be needed in the future, the students of today are going to need those skills to be able to get the great jobs, because I think that the green skills that are going to be created out of the innovations are going to be huge, right?
Yeah, I just saw this morning there's a group called, I think it's called Work for Climate or Working for Climate. And it's a network of people who support basically in the climate or sustainability world on just stepping into that sector and advancing the careers in that sector. And they've announced, I think just yesterday, an ambition to create an extra 100 million employees in the climate world by 2030. So that's absolutely huge.
Yeah.
But totally needed, because if you look at the scale of what we have to do, if we're talking about every business having a climate strategy, which is what the UK government announced during COP26, or if every business needs to produce a carbon account, there's a role for consultancies to do that, but every business really needs that internally, and so we need thousands and thousands of people entering the job market to do that. I think one of the best ways to do that is you don't need to be a sustainability professional to necessarily have a big impact. I think if you're a successful person in a career, you don't need to quit and do an undergrad or a master's and learn how to do sustainability. You can do change from within. So if you're in facilities management, that's one of the easiest ones, because you can make a business more sustainable that way. If you're in recruitment, you can look at how you can support the staff that you're helping to get into the workforce through different measures. Even if you're a security guard or something, you could try to engage with people on traveling to work more sustainably. Every job has got a capacity to have an impact.
Yeah, I think so.
Businesses are crying out for that sort of support. So unless you're really, really busy and you have a manager who doesn't really believe in climate change, or is probably not a good manager because they don't want to support your growth, I think most managers and most businesses, if you said to them, I want to pick up sustainability for this business, I think they'd bite your hand off and really support you in that.
Yeah, I see a lot of businesses where they're pulling together sustainability committees of different people around the business, from it could be somebody from accounting and somebody from from maintenance, it really doesn't matter, and they all come together and they work on the project and they do it out of a passion, which I think is of really value to a business. But as you say, you know, you just need to start somewhere, and there's enough resource about to help anyone. What do you see for the future? I mean, you know, like talking sort of 2030.
I see there's going to be a lot of change. 2030, that's an interesting point. And certainly when we get into 2050, we're going to have huge change. I think 2030, we're still going to be on that journey. We're still going to be moving. I think we're going to see more and more uptake of all these things that we're talking about. I think it's going to become much less viable for a business to continue with business as usual. Because the demand from the public will change. You've got different sectoral bodies pushing for change. You've got policy changing. You've got climate impact is going to continue to ramp up and force businesses to change. I think we may start to see, whenever the rules of the game change, whether that's because of an innovation or a change in a societal norm, businesses that don't change disappear. And that's why most businesses, or very few businesses, are around for like 50 or 100 years. The businesses come and go quite quickly. The ones that stick around are able to move with the times and innovate. And I think maybe around by 2030, we might start seeing some of those businesses who aren't able to adapt start to go, which sounds bad, and it's bad for those business owners, but those businesses will or should be replaced by new businesses who are more efficient and will be able to take up the slack in terms of jobs and contributions to the local economy. So I'm hopeful that we'll start to see an uptick in change, and we'll start to see some really positive news coming through. Yeah, we'll have to wait and see.
If you could make the change, you know, if you was thinking about, there's a lot of investment out there, and often I think that some of these companies, they don't know where to invest it, but where would you put your money if you had 10 million to invest in sustainable innovation? What would be the thing that you put your money on right now?
That's a really good question. If I was just purely looking for change and impact, to be honest, I would be very tempted. I've no idea how many episodes of Coronation Street you could buy an advert for with £10 million, but I think a massive marketing campaign on sustainability to communicate to the public the scale of the change required, to encourage them to make changes in their own life, point them towards support, I think that would have such a big impact, because that will help to create the mandate for more political pressure, for more change from businesses. So I'd be very tempted to do something like that, to be honest. In terms of innovation, oh God, that's a really good question. I think there's a lot to do in terms of supporting homes to insulate in the UK, and then facilitating the transition to electric vehicles is a huge challenge. I don't know how far 10 million would get you in that transition, but that would probably install quite a few vehicle charge points across the UK. So maybe something along those lines.
Do you think electric vehicles is like one of the biggest answers then? What do you think about hydrogen?
I'm not a massive expert on hydrogen. I know there are advantages and disadvantages to both approaches. As I understand it, hydrogen, you can fill up your car really quickly, so you'd be able to use existing like petrol station infrastructure, which has its advantages. And I know, you know, if you're talking about having a complete electric vehicle fleet, and then you look at parts of the UK that are just acres and acres of terraced houses with no off-road parking, there's huge challenges there in terms of how we're going to do that. So I'm not sure. I think we'll end up going down the electric vehicle route, but I'm not an expert on hydrogen.
Fair enough. It's interesting what you say about the advertising then. So do you not think that there is enough positive education in the public domain around being more sustainable?
I think there is in terms of it's part of the curriculum for primary school children now. Secondary school children obviously know it. I think when you get to university level, it's it sort of drops a bit because it's only if you do sustainability units generally in university, so that probably needs some tweaking. I think everyone who leaves a university should be able to enter the job market with a certain level of carbon literacy and an ability to influence the businesses that they work on in a sustainable context. But not everyone goes to university, right? So that's the thing. I'm just talking with my academic head on. If we're talking about general members of society who don't have the privilege to go to university, I think it's still there from earlier education. But if you're, say, my age and you have not been interested in this agenda, then you probably haven't had enough awareness. And certainly, if you look at the scale of the change required, I think people are, I wouldn't say they're being kept in the dark on purpose by the government or anything like that, but there's certainly not enough information out there in terms of what's going to happen. And it's nice to see things like your Attenborough documentaries and things like that on the BBC and stuff like that. But I think we can do a lot more in terms of educating people in terms of how is the world going to change and what are the changes we need, so that, you know, if you all of a sudden get told you need to start recycling plastics in a separate bin or recycling soft plastics by taking them to Tesco, that seems like a big behavioural shift to people, and it's like a pain and a nuisance that people have to go through. But if you understand the reason why, because you've had a value shift within you, because you've become aware of these challenges, it's not a problem at all. It's something that you want to do because you want to try to make a difference and contribute. So I think that's the key. We need to try and get this core value change in people by making them more aware.
Yeah, I totally agree. And look, Graeme, thank you so much for your insight and your expertise and, you know, sharing your thoughts with us. I really, really appreciate it. And it's been really good to talk to you and have this conversation. We've been waiting a long time to have it. So thanks a lot, and wish you all the best.
Thanks a lot, Sam.
All right.